Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Vimbai. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to all our viewers out there. We're focusing only on Nigeria today with respect to the economic numbers, the GDP figures that came out. And again, as you've already pointed out, 3.19%. But I do want to highlight the Daily Trust headline that Vimbai brought up during the newspaper review. This is something I've been stressing on since last week, even when I was on the morning show with Ayo and Rufai. The need to focus on the sub-nationals. So even with FAC allocations, as the Daily Trust has pointed out there, even with FAC allocations climbing, the states are still looking for more funding, and you can look at one of the sub-bullet points there that says experts are calling for more accountability. You had Mr. Aso Ighodalo of the PDP running for the gubernatorial position in Edo State. I remember Rufai asked him about water and water supply. If you are an indigene in Edo State, you are more concerned with getting water to bathe and drink than what is going on at the federal level. Governor Mba of Enugu State, he called a number of media outlets, including Arise News, to talk about his term in office after 1 year. Water supply was another issue, and he was able to bring that to them after years of them not having water supply in Enugu. So it is really, really important to really put the microscope on the sub-nationals, because the country, even these GDP numbers are looking up. What makes up Nigeria? It is the states, and it is the executive governors of these states, as far as accountability is concerned, that should be priority number one for a number of, for us or across the country. So let's get into the numbers now. These economic growth figures are a reminder that oil is essential to Nigeria. It was an oil story. If you look at the quarterly economic figures, hopefully on your screen, 3.19% in the first quarter of this year. So that's, of course, we're talking about second quarter, the April through June period. The first 3 months, January through March, was 2.9%. These are annualized figures. And if you look at this period last year, the second quarter, in fact, funny enough, that's when President Tinubu came into office, right? It was 2.51%. So now if we move on to a chart, you should have a line graph in front of you showing quarterly GDP growth in Nigeria over the year. So the green arrow is where President Tinubu came into office at about 2.51%. And you can see growth despite, partial removal of fuel subsidies, the exchange rates, the devaluation of the naira. You do see GDP growth grow. In fact, even peaking in the fourth quarter, which is traditional because of the festive activities that we have. You will see heightened economic activity, but then there's also a slowdown in the first quarter of the year. Moving to annual GDP growth, taking a look at what we are on a yearly basis. The Tinubu administration wants to go back to where we were under the Jonathan administration, of which, of course, Dr. Abati was a part of, where we had 6% GDP growth, if you look to the far left of your chart, in 2014. However, if you look at the two periods where we fell into recession, in 2016 and in 2020, 2016 because of the commodity bust where oil prices fell, and also in 2020 because of COVID-19 shutting down activities across the world, in both cases, the negative 1.9 and 1.5, it was oil that dragged down Nigeria's economy. If you look at 2023, 2.7% growth. The Tinubu administration is aiming for 3% this year. The IMF says we could do 3.3. We'll see if we maintain this type of 3% growth in this second quarter through to the end of the year, we might get there. But 3% is not where we want to be for a country of this size. We have to grow further. So again, I mentioned this was an oil sector story. So if you look at, hopefully you should have the oil numbers in front of you. 10.15% for oil, as far as the oil GDP growth is concerned. 10.15%. Look at the first quarter of the year. It contracted by 13.43. This period last year, oil grew by 5.7% as far as GDP. Now, crucially, take a look at, hopefully you should have oil production in front of you. Again, the green arrow shows you where President Tinubu came into office. It was 1.2 million barrels per day, and it has climbed since then. Of course, there's the issue of, condensates and so on. but oil production must rise, because if it rises, then you can bring in the foreign exchange that you need to defend your currency, and you can fund a number of issues that you're facing in your nation. So it is really crucial. The NNPC says we can get to 2 million barrels by the end of the year. I'm a bit skeptical about that. We'll see whether that happens. But again, the crucial point to take away here is that this is an oil story. Now, it's not just about the surface area macro growth. You have to dig into the numbers. The GDP figures are incredibly important because you have to know how the subsectors are doing. And if you look at the subsectors, you should have a chart in front of you. You just focus on the far right of your screen. Some of these sectors are not doing well, and I'll get into agriculture in a moment. But you can see agriculture at 1.41%. You can see manufacturing. I heard Dr. Abati mention manufacturing and productivity earlier when you were talking about it. I mean, 1.2% for manufacturing, ICT 4.4%, real estate. These sectors need to grow in order for the rest of the country to be picked up. I mentioned agriculture. We have to dig further into agriculture because that is how we feed. Food inflation, of course, it has come down from 40%, but it's still at 39%. If you look at this, your further chart focusing just on agriculture and the subsectors that make it, you will see that livestock is actually being decimated. The livestock sector, I think, save for only Q3 of 2023, has been in recessions territory for as long as we can remember. The same thing with fishery. Forestry is doing okay, but then how much do we get from there? Crop production, which is one of the, I think, the highest contributor to GDP growth, that in itself is only doing, I think, 1.7% or so. And we've represented this also in a bar chart form, just to show you how pronounced this is. So you should have a chart where you have livestock in red. You should have fisheries, I think, in blue, agriculture as a whole, the overall sector in yellow, and then crop production in orange. I mean, look at how far below the x-axis livestock has fallen. I mean, it was negative 30% or so in the first quarter of 2023. So it has really struggled. And we saw that during the Eid celebrations where people couldn't afford rams and so on and so forth. And you've got Christmas coming up again. So we really need for livestock to be boosted in the country. And even at the top of the chart, you can see that barely from agriculture to fisheries, none of them barely did 2%. So it is really crucial that we get growth in that regard. So again, the big takeaway from here, this was an oil story. We have to pump more oil in order to get growth. I know we have to diversify, but that's the context of the review of this. And also, if you look at even non-oil GDP growth, it stagnated. I mean, it stayed at 2.8% or so in the second quarter of this year. Let me get my figure. Yeah, 2.8. So non-oil sector was 2.8% in the second quarter. Q1 was 2.8, so it didn't move. It actually slowed from this period last year where it was 3.5. So that is our updates for today as far as the Nigerian economy is concerned.
Rotus, I mean, you have a finger on the problem. There are many sectors that are not doing well. But also, another part we should also look at is the sectors that are doing well, what are they even pulling? You talked about oil being this GDP being an oil story. What is oil pulling into an economy? Cumulatively, if we did about 5 trillion, as governmental revenue, and oil brought in about less than maybe 3 trillion or thereabout. What's the impact on this on our economy? I think those are the things we should look at. And that's why I say we can't just depend on oil alone. We keep telling this oil story all this while. Oil is 5.4% of the entire GDP. The non-oil sector is over 90%. And the GDP is about over 100 trillion naira. How can we get gas into the system? How can we get mining? How can we get solid minerals? See, Rotus, at a point in this country, tin and columbite used to add a lot to this economy. Coal used to add a lot to this economy. Today, most of all those coal plants out of Enugu, nowhere to be found. So there's an overdependence on oil, and it doesn't favor our economy. And another thing I would like to say is, the fact that we don't see this effect on the lives of the people is really startling. The best way to be able to measure if the economy is actually good is through the people's spending power. When you look at it, how well are the people spending? But the people can't even spend. Look at disposable income is depressed at a time like this. So President Tinubu should be able to look at an holistic roadmap, 1, for the service sector, 2, for all the places we have solid mineral prospect, 3, for gas. Gas can give us quick money if we can compete effectively on the world stage of gas. And that's how we can entirely fight. Enough of all of this praying for 2 million barrels per day. We've been hovering around 2 million, 2.5 million barrels per day since the 70s when we discovered, or since the 50s when we, okay, the 70s we were churning out over 2 million barrels per day. Since we discovered oil in Oloibiri in 56. We need to be able to do better than this and make this economy more robust. I look forward to a day where gas will bring hundreds of billions of dollars to this economy, where tech will bring hundreds of billions of dollars to this economy. That's what an economy is, not just a danger of a single story with oil, oil, oil every time.
Thank you so much for that, Rotus. You know, when you look at the list of states that are in the lineup to borrow these funds, you know, you see Adamawa, you see Anambra, you see, I believe, Imo State is there, you see Jigawa, you see, when you look at the states, then you kind of, you also look at their IGR profiles, and you just say to yourself, okay, so when this money is borrowed, what do we intend to do with it, and how is it going to be paid back? So there's an inherent problem there, which is that, you know, there's a gap, let's borrow. Of course, we've reiterated there's nothing wrong with borrowing, but are we borrowing for productive spending within these states? So this, you know, I feel there's some sort of commission that needs to be set up. Oh, let me not say that, because, you know, that's often a way that's used to you know, to make more money. But we need to reestablish how these state economies are set up and how the accountability process is rolled out. And also, there also needs to be measures with regards to how much autonomy do these states have to continue to borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow endlessly with no real plan for development in sight. Now, the other heartbreaking figures for me were definitely the agriculture figures, because the agricultural potential in this country is immense. So very heartbreaking to see that that's the little that we're currently doing with agriculture. I know we're out, you know, my time is up, so I'll hand over to Dr. Abati.
Okay, very quickly, on the issue of GDP growth, beyond the figures, I will again restate the point made by Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, that there has been a decline in the last decade in terms of GDP growth, and she put the figure at 0.9%. And she made the point that despite all the reforms that are not yielding expected results, what Nigeria still needs is sound economic policies that work for the people. And I think that's the major point. And it was in that context that I spoke earlier about making this economy a productive economy, and an economy that functions both at the primary level, the secondary level, and at the tertiary level within the supply chain, whether you are talking about macroeconomics or, you know, the micro level. That's that about that. You raised a very serious point about the subnationals and accountability. Accountability is the word. Oftentimes, when we analyze, you know, economic performance in Nigeria, we are always focusing on the federal government. But the states are the main areas of concern because they are even closer to the people than the federal government. And you see a lot of irresponsibility at the level of the states because the accountability mechanisms are almost non-existent. The audit processes are weak. The governors are emperors. They borrow, they use federal government for sovereign guarantees. The question is, are the people asking the right questions? What do they do with the money? Anambra, for example, wants to borrow 245 billion to fund their budget deficit. Katsina wants to borrow over 100 billion. All of this is, you know, in addition to the fact that between June last year and now, and June this year, all these states, they've collected over 6 trillion. For the rest of this year, they are going to collect over 5.5 trillion. In addition to IGL, now the people should begin to ask these governors, what are you doing with the money? Because in many of these states, primary healthcare is a problem, education is a problem. So we should ask more questions for the subnationals, not just the federal government. Thank you very much, Rotus.